Public dialogue and civic engagement are important. They play a role in improving the health and well-being of Texans across our great state. That's why Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Texas is proud to support Texas Tribune events like the conversation you're about to see.
Please join me in welcoming the Honorable Celia Israel and Paul Workman. Again, thank you. Again, thank you for being here. We are here to discuss in some combination the 85th session, the issues that you're discussing and working on in the interim and looking ahead through the election season to the 86th. And I would say probably no more important issue in Texas than education, and maybe no more important issue even with respect on the campus of a community college and public education. In fact, public and higher ed are joined, so in some ways we're talking about the same thing. Last session, Representative Israel, the Supreme Court told you that the system of funding public education is awful but lawful. Mm-hmm. It's really, really, really bad, but just not bad enough for the Supreme Court to force you to do anything. They told you all at the legislature fix it, and you didn't. Why not?
We tried.
Okay.
We knew going into the session that that we were declared Byzantine by the Supreme Court, and not quite unconstitutional. But we know what happened. I think was the weird dynamic, and in what many have characterized as the most difficult session that they had ever seen. For the reason that we knew that hostages were going to be taken because the politics were coming up on us, that an imaginary crime called crimes in bathrooms was made a priority issue by the Senate. The House, not so much. We passed a bill to begin to address the inequities. It was sent to the Senate, who then promptly sat on it and said, we're not going to hear your bill until you have a hearing on the bathroom bill. So a hostage was taken, and that hostage was one attempt to try to begin to address the inequities in school funding.
Yeah.
Very disappointing.
Representative Workman, my memory is that there was also an issue of the Senate's desire that the House take up what they call school choice, which was really some version of a voucher or an education savings account or some other means to allow people who wish to send their kids to private school to have some financial relief in doing so. Lieutenant Governor Patrick said to me, said to others before the session began, we're not going to do school finance without school choice. No one without the other. As always, transparent about his intentions. That's pretty much what happened, right?
It is pretty much what happened, and I supported school choice for special needs children that Representative, I've forgotten his name, drawn a blank, but anyway.
Right. Just name members. You're going to get there eventually. There's only 149 others. That's fine. Yeah.
Anyway, yeah. And so that bill didn't go anywhere, partially because of what.
But that was also a much more narrow attempt at the so-called school choice question. Right. Yeah. Very narrow.
So,
right. But you believe that we should be adding more money to public school funding. You're a believer in some kind of a fix to the school finance system.
Well, look, let's talk about that a minute. I don't know how you fix the school finance system. You really have three choices. You got income tax, sales tax, and ad valorem. If you do income tax, which we're not going to do, but even if you did, the concentration of wealth is in the urban areas.
Right.
So the folks that are complaining the most about ad valorem taxes going to the state, they would be the ones putting the most money in an income tax situation as well. Right. And sales tax, if you want to do sales tax, and a lot of people support that,
right,
you either got to do one of two things. You're either going to have a 23-cent or 25-cent increase in the sales tax,
right,
or you're going to broaden the base to every single thing that you buy. Drugs,
right,
medicine, food, everything.
Yeah.
And so that's
and the sales tax is generally regarded as pretty regressive. If you increase the sales tax, you hit the people who can afford to be hit by it the most. The reality, though, Representative, is you're talking about revenue. Those are all revenue sources. How about not spending money on some other things and redirecting that money to public ed? Couldn't you do that?
I don't know what you would suggest. We have 38% of our budget is related to health and human services.
And that's growing Medicaid. Every year, year over year.
And that's growing every year. We have less and less control over that. And another 38% is on public education. That doesn't leave a whole lot.
So there's nothing in the budget that you think you're spending money on currently that you would rather see cut back and redirected to public ed?
Look, I don't believe, I actually are one of those who believes that there probably is enough money in the school systems. It just needs to be spent better.
Right.
So
Let's make Representative Israel chair of the Appropriations Committee for purposes
Let's
of this
do that.
conversation. So you now have control over part of the budget writing apparatus. What would you not be spending money on to move money into public ed if there were no new revenue sources?
Well, as a child of who was raised on the border between Texas and Mexico, our number one trading partner, I wouldn't have spent $800 million every 2 years on militarizing the border with Texas resources for what is a federal responsibility.
So in that respect, you and the
waste.
Republicans, in the legislature agree that the border security problem is one that largely is in the domain of the federal government. That was what they said the last time we passed an $800 million expense on border security.
Ridiculous. It was hard. It was difficult.
I thought you all objected, though, the
Isn't
last
it-
time they said it was federal. When Obama was in the White House, you guys didn't like that they were saying,
It was difficult for me because I am from the border, and the border to me is about commerce. It's about cousins. It's about doing business.
Yeah.
And when you vilify your number one trading partner and act like those people are coming over here to do crime, every single last one of them, when you and I both know they're coming over here to build our buildings and drive our economy that is very much in need of that labor, it is exhausting that our federal government, rather than fix the system and give these people an opportunity to work here legally, find a path to citizenship, we're going to spend our money on a wall and on getting DPS to hire more troopers who need a pension, who need equipment, who need cars, who need helicopters and other military toys that I don't think we needed to spend our money on. But let me make another point, and that is you brought up the most difficult issue that very few people know the solution to, those formulas. Any one of us could come up with a different way. 2 years ago, when the Supreme Court said your system is Byzantine, we heard crickets from the governor. I think that would have been an opportunity to focus 150 House members and 31 senators on the most important issue of the day. So you all get together, and you can't leave until you get us through to a path and a vision. And it's a difficult political situation.
so force everybody in
We
the
should
room,
have had
lock
a
the
special
door.
session on
Yeah.
public education so that we're not working on thousands of bills
Right.
and hundreds of issues, that we're working on one issue and perhaps a few dozen bills and show the political courage that it takes to step up to the plate for our future economic vitality.
Now, as you know, coming out of the last special session at the conclusion of the 2017 session, there was a school finance commission. That was one of the byproducts of that special session that has now currently been meeting.
Another study.
Well, they're studying it, but would you rather they not be studying it?
I would rather that we be taking action and showing respect for our children and teachers and administrators who are dealing with over-testing in an environment where we're dealing right now with safety in schools is top of mind.
Yep.
When I talk to the counselors in my district, they say we need more help so that when we cut public education after the recession, we never filled back what we took out. And we're just whistling through the graveyard, y'all. We're just acting like everything's fine, and it's not fine. And I think it deserves special attention from a body that is disparate and diverse.
You know, Representative Workman, we're adding, I think the number is 82,000 kids to the Texas public school system every year based on the growth in population. There are people who don't know as much about these issues as you do, but are voters, regular observers, citizens of the state who look at that and they go, how can you not be spending more money on public ed when you're increasing the population of public education by 82,000 a year? What do you say about that?
Well, we are funding those 82,000 in addition to what we've been doing. We fully fund the enrollment growth throughout the state of Texas.
Right, but is that enough?
Well, I guess that goes back to the argument of whether or not there's enough
Yeah.
money in the system.
Yeah. Do you think the system is spending money inefficiently? You know, you hear a lot about how before we give more money to public education should justify that it's spending the money we give them wisely. Now, people point to things like $60 million football stadiums and scoreboards and superintendent salaries. These are the talking points in political seasons about why we don't need to be spending more on public education. What do you think about that?
Well, look, we've got school districts that are spending $8,000 or $9,000 per student that are performing very well, and we have school districts that are spending $10,000, $12,000, $13,000 per student and are performing very poorly.
So that you don't think there's a correlation between spending and performance?
I don't think there's necessarily a correlation between spending and performance, no.
What about the border security question that Representative Israel raised? I knew she would say that. I knew it. This is often the first talking point when you hear from people. We say, well, what would you spend less on? There's a lot of discussion around how 2 sessions ago we said the federal government was responsible for border security. The people who passed that legislation didn't like the Democratic president not doing his job on border security. Now you have a Republican president. Can't you simply hand off that responsibility, as you said you wanted to your Republican president?
We certainly do believe that border security is a federal responsibility, and we believe that the federal government for many years has failed in that. And we believe that there was enough criminal activity coming across the border that the $800 million that we put in is about the criminal activity.
Yeah.
It's not about gathering up the lady with her 2 young children. The Border Patrol is supposed to be doing that. We're worried about, there are 7 major cartels in Mexico. 6 of them have command and control centers in the state of Texas.
Yeah.
And there are safe houses where people are coming in, people are being human trafficked, and they're putting into involuntary servitude. And, they pay so much money to get across, and they make them pay more.
Yeah.
And this is the goal of DPS, is to try to push back against that criminal activity across the board.
Have you seen metrics from DPS or anybody else that suggest that money has produced results?
Well, there's always a question about the metrics and how you measure whether or not those results.
There's been a lot more traffic tickets given out in South Texas.
Yeah.
A lot of them.
You have...
Speeders are well under control.
Well, what do you think? Tell me about the metrics, and then I'll ask Representative Israel to...
I'm sorry, I'm being snarky.
That's okay. We've done events with you before. We know what to...
Shut up. Shut up.
You have these ebbs and flows in the crossings.
Yeah.
And so when the crossings go down, does that mean that it's working? When the crossings go up, does that mean it's not working? When there's more arrests, does that mean it's working?
Yeah.
It's hard to determine that.
Right.
But it is important that the state of Texas take care of the criminal activity that is coming across the border.
Before I go back to Representative Israel, let me ask you as a small business owner whether the economic argument that Representative Israel is making is resonant at all to you. Mexico is a very large trading partner of the United States and of Texas. There's a lot of cross-border commerce, and many people believe that the militarization, as Representative Israel, or the securitization of the border, as somebody else might call it, is somehow an impediment to the economic well-being of the state. What do you say about that?
Well, there's no question but what, for many years, the state of Texas has depended upon migrant workers.
Yeah.
And
well, the construction industry that you've been in for many years relies on immigrant work and undocumented immigrant work, does it not?
It does. However, it is not legal. And so you're seeing more and more people that are using E-Verify to make sure that the people that they're employing are legally here.
Right. Make the case about the statistical basis for the spending on border security, Representative Israel. What do you think? Have you not seen metrics that would suggest this is money well spent?
If I were queen, I would have...
We've upgraded you from appropriations chair to queen in like 5 minutes.
It's hard, Evan. It's hard because I had my colleagues say to me during the heat of the negotiation over the budget, and they said, well, Celia, you're from Austin. You're off the hook. You don't have to be as anti this. And I said, well, I'm not off the hook because I'm from El Paso, and this resonates with me.
Yep.
This is home base. And we are a country of immigrants, and we're not only, I think this is bad policy, it's a bad use of our money, and we're sending signals out there that immigrants are bad people, where industry after industry comes to Paul and I and says, home builders, for example, I'm in the real estate industry, we are having a crisis of labor. And nothing in the system is saying, fix the mechanics around the immigration system so that these people who are coming here to work can work here legally, and should they choose, find a path to citizenship. It's where my grandfather came here to work on the railroads, and we all have an immigrant story to tell. So it's frustrating that in a time of great need in the state of Texas, when we cut public ed, We found $800 million every 2 years for DPS troopers and their needs, but we didn't find money to prevent tragedies from happening like what happened in Santa Fe. You can say that that was preventable. These are young people, in this example, who were troubled. And so I don't want to say that government has an answer for all of this, but we sure as hell misplaced our monies and sent a bad signal out that, in my view, is anti-immigrant and anti-business and anti-future economic vitality.
Representative Workman, to that point about economic vitality, I picked on you a little bit because I know you're in the construction business, and there's always a conversation around immigrant labor and the construction business. The reality is it's not just the construction business.
Right.
More than 1 out of every 4 employees in Texas in the agricultural industry is immigrant labor, many of them undocumented. Mm-hmm. In the service industry, many of them undocumented. I've mentioned the construction industry. There's concern that if we simply did what some want, I'm not suggesting you do, and deported everybody in this state who is here without status, that the economy of Texas would literally collapse with the loss of the labor force. Is there a legitimate conversation to be had, rule of law on the one hand, but economic vitality on the other, and figuring out how we can finally square that circle?
Look, Celia is exactly right.
Thank you.
The immigration
Next topic.
The immigration situation needs to be fixed at the federal level.
Yeah.
We need to have a way for these people to be here legally and to be able to work.
And what's that mean? What does a fix mean in your eyes?
Well,
Now you're king. If she's queen, you're king. Wave your scepter.
So
You
who
can
backs
fix it
me?
however you want. What would you do if you could fix it?
Well, you know, we used to have the Bracero program years ago, and I think it worked fine back then. And, you know, there was those that came along that did away with the Bracero program. I don't know why that wouldn't work. But I do think that if they could get the federal government to figure out how to fix the immigration system where people could come over and get here legally and work, whether that's just having a green card or whether that's here for permanent status as a citizen, I don't know.
Representative Workman, one of the difficulties I would submit to getting to a solution is that it is no longer about immigrants and the economy or the workforce or cousins, as you say. We've begun to discuss immigration and this question entirely through the lens of fear. We talk about family separations at the border. We have a story today on the Tribune, wonderful story about how we have a number of veterans of the United States military, people who served in our military for all of us who are undocumented, were sent back home, and who are desperate to come back and are asking if, having served in the U.S. military, it's possible for them to return on that basis with legal status. We obviously have this unresolved question of DACA. Texas has the second highest DACA population of any state in the country, 124,000 in the state who are DACA recipients. The cultural conversation is trumping the pragmatic attempt to get a solution out of this. What do we do about that?
Well, there is a lot of fear involved. I do believe that. And
is it legitimate fear?
I don't know. I mean, every person's fear is legitimate to them, I assume, but I don't know that overall it's legitimate. But you know, we do have to figure out a way to solve this problem at the federal level because we can't do it at the state level.
Yeah.
You know, I famously filed legislation when I was a freshman to create a workers card for people that were here.
Yeah.
And we would tax those workers. They would pay a fine for being here legally, and they would work. And
you were pilloried for doing that. Somehow
I was strung up.
You're what passes for a liberal in this legislature.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
And so, and they're still using it against me.
Right. Yeah. They are.
And so there's a lot of that out there.
Yeah. You understand, Representative Israel, what I'm talking about when I say there's a culture of fear that has enveloped this issue. Basically, fear of the other is a defining narrative through line in nearly every conversation on this subject, to the point that we can't even get to a discussion of solutions.
Yeah, and big issues that Paul and I do agree on, like transportation, and big issues like really helping public education, real issues like fully funding our retired teachers' pension and health care benefits, go by the wayside because we're fighting over wedge issues that are part of the cultural wars that don't help. And they don't help, especially when you've got a legislature that meets every 2 years for 140 days. The clock is ticking, and we're not doing anything about it except meeting and planning, and not, and again, back to my contention is that for the public education purposes, that's our biggest issue. That's my biggest responsibility, and it deserves to have had already a special session.
Yeah. Let's leave the immigration conversation for a moment and go to something even less controversial, and that's guns. We have been, as a result of the horrible situation in Santa Fe on the 18th of May, been talking about what response, if any, the state should have and the federal government should have to this epidemic of gun violence in the schools. We are at a point again, I think, this year where there have been as many mass shootings, multiple casualty or multiple victim shootings, as there have been days in the year. This has been the case, unfortunately, for several years running. Representative Workman, is it possible to offer people who want to see a change in policy the comfort that they seek while also being, as I know you are, for the Second Amendment? Is there a place where everybody can come together on this issue?
I don't know, because you don't want to punish the 99.5% of law-abiding citizens who have weapons because of an evil few. There are things that we can do at the schools that will help a lot, I think,
right.
and so I can do that. But whether or not that means you ban bump stocks or high capacity magazines, I don't know the answer to that.
Do you have an opinion about? Let me ask you about the big four. I mean, I'll just get you on the record on this. Do you believe we should have a ban on assault weapons?
No.
Do you believe we should have a ban on high-capacity magazines?
No.
Should we have a ban on bump stocks?
No.
Should we have stepped-up background checks for the purchase of handguns or of other weapons?
That, yes.
So you would increase background checks, but in terms of the other potential solutions, you're a no on the others?
Yes.
Do you like the governor's plan announced yesterday that would, or earlier this week, I should say, that would, number of steps in response to the Santa Fe stuff?
Yes, and there are several things that I had already been talking about that the governor's picked up on, and one is increasing the number of counselors. When a few sessions back, I filed legislation. At that time, we had one counselor for every 425 students.
Yep.
And I had filed legislation to increase that to one counselor for every 300 students.
Yep.
And have the state pay for it. Of course, it had a fiscal.
Where's money going to come from for that?
Yeah, and that it had a fiscal note, so it didn't go anywhere. Hopefully
Right.
now we'll have a little more interest in that sort of thing. We need more counselors.
Yep.
And we need the counselors not to be administering tests, standardized tests. They need to be counseling students.
Counseling, right.
And that's what we need that very badly. That is
Yeah.
one of the things we need. We need a stepped-up presence of police in our schools. And that's unfortunate, but I think that over time, if you have more police presence in the schools, then those that are intent on evil will pick the softer targets. They won't go there. I think that's important. That we do.
What about the arming of school teachers?
I think if a school teacher wants to be armed, I think that's fine. But I certainly don't think that we should mandate that there are a certain number that need to be armed, or that each school district have that school marshal. If they want to do that, they think that's right for their district, I think that's fine.
Representative Israel, is there any common ground on what you just heard between you and Representative Workman?
Yes, there is a lot of common ground. Several of my colleagues, we had about a dozen bills from my colleagues who happened to be Democrats, who had bills that did not involve a fiscal note, that did not involve taking anybody's gun away or high-capacity magazine away, that were dead on arrival, that got no hearing, or they got a hearing and then stayed in committee. Representative Moody had the red flag bill, which would say that a law enforcement could temporarily, in a restraining order situation, in a violent family situation, go and make sure if the gun was registered to that person that until you get better, you're not going to have access to it.
And there's a red flag component in Governor Abbott's
Yes.
multi-point plan.
Yes.
Right, yeah.
Donna Howard had one that was about gun safety. The reality is gun deaths are also in large part suicides. So there is a human problem here that we are not addressing, and I believe firmly that we should have addressed that already. And when we cut resources to schools, in tight budgets, what was cut were things like parent support specialists and counselors and others who can be of assistance to a troubled child.
Yeah.
We live in a different time right
Yeah.
now.
Your answer to the 4 things I mentioned earlier to Representative Workman.
Well, I don't know.
Would you ban high-capacity magazines?
Yes.
Would you ban assault weapons?
Yes.
Would you ban bump stocks?
Yes.
Would you require stepped-up background checks for purchase of weapons?
Sí, señor.
All of those. Right. The people who say, and it is not just people with tinfoil hats. It is way too easy to stereotype and let's not do that. But there are legitimately people who believe that these kinds of measures and others are a few steps away from the government coming to get their guns. Do they have anything legitimate to be concerned about?
No.
Representative Workman, do those
We're not
people
changing the Constitution
have
of the United
anything
States.
to be concerned about?
Well, I just asked a question. Do we want to live in a country where only the authorities have weapons? I mean, I think.
Is that been proposed? I'm not aware of
what
that.
we're saying.
I'm just saying, is that an issue?
Well, if they come and take your guns, then.
But do you? So what are the steps between the things that I mean, it's perfectly legitimate. Of course, you can have any position you want to oppose the banning of assault weapons or the banning of high-capacity magazines. How does that get you those issues from the government's coming to get my guns?
Well, I think it's the old nose under the camel's tent type thing that a lot of people believe.
You give an inch, and then all of a sudden.
I mean, and I'm not
Right.
saying that I'm fear the government's going to come and take our guns, but I agree with you that there are those out there who legitimately believe that that's what is desired, is to take all the guns away from people.
Right. Let me step back from this and ask you, as we head into an election season, about the political environment. Representative Israel, you now have a nominee for governor in Lupe Valdez, the sheriff of Dallas County. Mm-hmm. How do you feel about the top of your ticket heading into this election season?
We've got a great ticket. We have Sheriff Valdez has been elected 4 times in Dallas. We have an outstanding ag commissioner candidate. We have 4 women, I think, at the top running statewide. Beto O'Rourke, what's not to love about a boy from El Paso, Texas?
Except for the fact that nobody from El Paso has ever gotten elected statewide in the history of Texas, although I will acknowledge there has to be a first at some point, right? Yeah.
It's a mountain time zone. You'll get used to it.
Yeah. He'll do everything that you want, but
Blood
just an
rushes
hour
to
earlier.
head,
That's what it means, right?
You have a little hyperventilating, and then you realize, oh, it's all good.
It's all fine. Yeah.
So
you're happy with your ticket?
There's a lot of experience there,
Right.
and roughly 80% of my colleagues have an opponent in the fall. If you're a believer that redistricting is part of the problem and the political dilemma that we have, this is a good year for us to start testing the waters, because there are quality people on both sides of the aisle who are going to make a case to the voters who vote in neither primary, but who firmly believe that their vote counts. And they're going to have some choosing to do.
You have many more Democrats running in races where Democrats have typically taken a pass, that's for sure.
Yeah.
We know that. Whatever the outcome is,
every Republican,
you followed candidates.
Every Republican
Right.
member of Congress has
Right.
a Democrat, and about 80% of my colleagues, not that I don't want them to come back,
Right.
but I want all of us to be accountable.
Yeah.
It upsets me that I don't have a Republican or even a Libertarian
Right.
to hold me accountable and make sure that I don't take anything for granted.
Yeah.
That's not right.
Now, let me be the snarky one, Representative Workman. She's happy with the top of her ticket. I suspect you're happy with the top of her ticket, too.
I think we'll do just fine.
You do, yeah. Governor Abbott debated Wendy Davis one time on a Friday night during high school football season in the Valley. He may debate Lupe Valdez 1,000 times this fall. Right?
He might.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the Republicans perceive this to be a weaker ticket than the Democrats typically field. Obviously, Representative Israel does not agree with that. Do you agree with that?
I think it's, I don't want to say anything disparaging about Sheriff Valdez, but.
You kind of just did with that setup.
But I think we'll do just fine.
You think you do just, okay, now let me ask you about the top of your ticket. I mean Trump. I don't mean Governor Abbott. This may be a midterm year, but no matter who you are as a Democrat, no matter what you're running for, no matter where you're running, no matter who your opponent is President Trump. That's how this election is setting up. If President Trump is at the top of your ticket, Representative Workman, are you good with that under the current political environment?
Look, hate him or love him, you got to admit that he's making changes and he's doing things that are.
His staff is changing.
Let him answer. Let him answer. You got to admit he's doing things. Keep going,
He's doing
please.
things.
Let's let him answer. Yep.
And I've heard somebody say that he's not a Republican and he's not a Democrat, he's a pragmatist, and he sees a problem and he goes after it, and
Yep.
he doesn't care about anybody says about it.
Yeah.
And that appears to be what he's doing.
You embrace the agenda of this administration and this president?
I do. I think he's done a lot of really good things, and I think there will be more good things coming.
You live in a district and represent a district that is as close to 50-50 as most in the state. President Trump picks up the phone and calls the Workman construction company one day and says, Paul, I want to come down to your district and campaign with you. Do you invite him into your district to campaign with you?
Of course we would.
You would.
We would love to have the president come and
Right.
campaign for us.
Now let me
He
be
won't do it.
now let me be snarky again. He's happy with the president top of the ticket, so are you.
Well, the biggest value that he's given to me is he's woken up a lot of people who recognize how important their vote is, and I am a firm believer that there are a lot of people who are going to vote in an off year who normally would think my vote is only more important in a presidential year. That's our challenge. Our statewide are not on the ballot at the same time as our president.
Yeah.
And I lament the fact that Texas is always at the bottom when it comes to turnout. I want people, regardless of who they ultimately vote for.
Right.
The fact that 37% of Texans voted the last time we had a governor's race is not only disappointing, it's dangerous. That's not a mandate.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of big issues that I
Right.
want voters to weigh in on.
Representative, I saw the Trump campaign begin on, I think it was June the 16th of 2015, with Mr. Trump descending an escalator in Trump Tower talking about Mexican rapists. And I thought to myself, if ever Hispanics are going to turn out to vote in Texas, this is going to be the election. It didn't happen. Why should I believe you this time?
Which representative were you looking at?
Israel. I mean, the one who's predicting greater voter turnout. I want to know why I should believe any more this time than all the previous times Democrats have said voter turnout would be higher. Why should I believe you this time?
Well, a girl can dream. But from everyone that I'm talking to, and I'm making an intentional outreach to those who live outside of Travis County. Yep. To bounce things off of, because I don't want to become insulated by talking to people who only agree with me.
Right.
And there's a lot of people out there who identify with neither party who are very disappointed in this president, and I think they will have choices to make.
Yeah.
And they're educated, they're smart, they're doing well. They bought out in Cedar Park, not in Hyde Park, and they're in North Texas. So the fact that we have all of these, mini whirlwinds, so to speak, in Texas, I think is going to mean that whether they are paying attention to the top of the ticket or who do I want to be my next state representative or state senator, they're going to have some decisions to make.
And do you think they're more focused on that this time?
And each one of those little campaigns is going to have their own budget to say, what's our universe? Where's our direct mail? What's our radio ads?
Right.
So there's going to be an awful lot of individuals
Yeah.
who are trying to get the vote out in ways that we haven't had before.
Do you worry, Representative Workman, that Texas is woke? That suddenly now we have this problem of if you're a Republican and you're concerned that suddenly this sleeping giant, this non-vote in Texas across ethnicities, across geographies, across genders, has suddenly now been activated by the events of the last 18 months, that suddenly the wave is coming to get you. Do you worry about that?
Look, first of all, let me say that Celia has talked to people who don't like Trump. I've talked to a number of people who said,
Who do like him, right?
Trump was not my first choice, he wasn't my second choice, he wasn't my fourth choice, but he's doing a great job. So I'm hearing
The opposite, yeah, right.
And so whether there's going to be a wave or a ripple, I don't know. But
Well, let me ask you I want you to put that. I want to get you to answer that though. Here's your choices: puddle, wave, tsunami, sharknado. What's it going to be from your vantage point?
I think it's going to be a puddle.
You do?
Yeah.
Puddle, wave, tsunami, sharknado.
Sharknado. Just
Yeah, well, of
sounds
course you
cool.
said sharknado. It's fun to say sharknado.
The question is, Evan,
What is that?
I'm glad you asked me what that was and not what woke was. I can explain sharknado to you later. That's
Evan,
okay.
the question is that the folks that Paul is talking to, in my view, are probably already good voters. The people that I'm talking to are good voters in presidential years. And the question is, are they going to recognize the value of their vote in an off-year election?
Who's the next speaker going to be? Representative
know.
Israel?
It's going to be a surprise. It won't be who you think it is. It always happens.
Well, how do
that
you
way.
know who I think it's going to be?
Because I don't know who you think it's going to be, but I've seen
But you
names.
guarantee me it's not going to be that person.
I've seen names floating around Texas Tribune, and
It's not going to be any of those people.
I don't know the answer to your question, sir, but it's going to be somebody, in my view, probably that we hadn't thought of, because we're going to have several different votes, and by the time the white smoke appears out of the top of the Lady Liberty's torch,
Right.
it will be like, who's that guy
Okay.
or gal?
Well, this is the Texas Legislature. It's almost certainly going to be Guy.
Did you know that white smoke comes out of the Lady
Yeah.
Liberty's
So let me ask you that. Who's the next Pope going to be, Representative Workman? Who's it going to be? Is it going to be one of your guys or one of her guys?
Well, it won't be one of her guys.
It could be somebody that Paul and I agree on.
It could be. I don't know who it's going to be. It's way too early to speculate
Yeah.
on the speaker's race.
What's the over-under on the number of people running for speaker?
Oh, I'd say there's going to be 8,
Yeah.
probably.
Number of people who are going to get in who are not yet in at this point.
Yeah.
Right. Is the person going to be more of a Strauss Republican or more of a Patrick Republican?
Well, I suspect they'll be right of Strauss.
Well, physics would demand that they be right of Strauss, right? Unless Sarah
Necessarily.
Davis is the speaker, right?
Not necessarily.
Is it going to be a Strauss Republican or a Patrick Republican?
I have no idea, sir. I already answered your question.
You've called me sir twice. I don't like that. Representative Workman,
Sir.
before we go to audience questions, I want to ask you about what may be a very big issue in the next session, and it's one that you've expressed a strong point of view on, and it's aligned with a bigger theme in the legislature of late, and that is local control. And the issue I'm talking about specifically is paid sick leave. What is the problem with paid sick leave?
The problem with paid sick leave is very simple. Municipalities have no business telling private businesses how to run their business, how to hire people, who to hire, and what to pay them, how to compensate them. They just have no business. The free market should be doing that. It's just not up to the municipalities.
Agree or disagree?
Disagree.
Why?
Approximately 46 other states and municipalities around the great United States of America have found a way to put together a sick leave policy. Is it this policy? I don't know. Is it something to strive for, to aspire to, for the good of our families who are just trying to get to work on time? Yes.
Yeah.
That doesn't make it right. Just because there's 46 others that do it, doesn't make it right.
But just saying no is not an answer.
Well, sure it is.
So crafting a better plan, in my view, is something that I think we should strive for. I'm not one to simply knock things down because it was an Austin idea. It may not be the best idea, but I think that it is something that we should be aspiring to, and that is providing our employees
Right.
with the best benefits possible.
Representative Workman, we hear a lot about the will of the voters. We should respect the will of the voters. If the will of the voters in Austin is to have paid sick leave, and we don't know that yet because the voters haven't been asked to vote on it, but theoretically the next election could be a referendum on those local officials who passed paid sick leave. Shouldn't we allow the voters of Austin to have their say by way of their elections rather than having the state come down and tell the voters of Austin that they can't have their way?
Well, now, wait a minute. Some of those voters voted for me as well.
Right.
40% of my constituents live inside the city of Austin.
Right.
I have a role, I have a duty to them as well.
Sure.
I'm hearing from them, and they're saying the city is out of control.
Right.
And
But
we need
couldn't
to
those
do
people
something.
vote out the local officials who passed paid sick leave?
Well, I mean, they should, but will they? I don't know. But that doesn't mean I'm going to sit by and let these socialist-type policies make their way into the city of Austin.
My memory of local control, now this is a broader conversation, and it goes back to the last session and probably the session before that. I remember when local control meant that the locals controlled things, right? It seems like now, and I remember also when conservatives took as an article of faith that the best government was the government that was closest to those being governed. And it seems like that's now been flipped. Can you tell me why I've got that wrong?
Look, the Declaration of Independence says that governments are instituted to protect the freedoms of their citizens,
Right.
not strip their freedoms. And that's what this city council is doing.
Yeah.
And let me also say this.
Yeah.
There are two issues. The first is that the cities were chartered by the state.
Right.
Okay, so the cities get their authority from the state. Secondly, Article 11, Section 13 of the Texas Constitution gives the state legislature specific authority to deal in matters of governance at the local level.
Yep.
This is not some new crazy idea that
Right.
Representative Workman's come up with.
This is civics textbook stuff.
It is.
Right, yeah, I mean,
So-
the fact is, Representative Israel, he is right. The states created the federal government. States have the ability to push back on the federal government, imposing its will on the states. States created the cities and the counties. The state has the authority to regulate
We do.
the cities and the counties. That does not seem to be in dispute.
The prism that I see things through is not black and white. I think that the city of Austin rushed this thing through and gave Paul Workman a softball with which he can now drive home an issue to his base. But I think that if Paul and I were working on this issue to take to the legislature, we would talk to those who are going to be affected and say, what can you live with? And then go to the other people and say, what can you live with? And you put something together that all sides can agree upon.
So you think the city of Austin messed this up?
I think the city of Austin, I was not privy to the negotiations, but I think
But you
that,
said they rushed it. That sounds like they messed it up.
I think they rushed it. I would not have moved this quickly on something so dramatic that was so vehemently opposed by the business
They could
community.
have predicted, I mean, they poked a bear with a stick.
Thank you.
They did predict, they
Just
could have predicted that
give
this was
Paul
going to be the
Workman a
response.
softball.
Right.
They started out with fair chance hiring. They rushed that through. They rushed it through expedited permitting. They rushed through paid sick leave. The next one's coming up is predictive scheduling. And now the next thing after that is probably going to be election vouchers. And these are things that they're pushing through very fast without stakeholder involvement. And we just have to push back against that kind of stuff.
Okay. We have microphones here in the front, one on one side, one on the other. Please line up and ask questions. We will take as many as we can until 1 o'clock. These guys have been great and good sports, and I appreciate that, and we'll take as many of your questions. Please be good sports, too. Ma'am, we'll start with you. Oh, I don't mind, whichever you allow. Alphonse and Gaston, whichever one of you wants to go first, that's fine, so go ahead. Oh. That's okay. You can use your outside voice, too. That's fine.
Can you hear me? Oh, there it goes.
Go ahead.
Hi there. Mr. Workman was quoting Bible verses. I would like to say Texas Constitution Chapter 7. You're supposed to be fully funding Texas education, and you're not. The Chapter 41, Robin Hood, has been sucking money. It's smothering Austin ISD.
$500 million out of Austin, right, going and recapture payments to other communities. But that is the law, right?
I'm sorry, sir?
But that is the law, right?
I'm saying that we need to fix it immediately. Okay. Over half of the property tax money in Travis County is going back to Texas Legislature, and it's not going to education, it's going to the general fund. The Texas Legislature is screwed up and they need to fix it.
Okay, what's your question? Or is that your question?
I guess I'm asking Mr. Workman
Yeah.
and Celia Israel if the Texas Legislature can manage to do their job and fix Texas education funding,
Right.
or if they're ready to go home and let somebody else step up and get it done.
Representative Workman, the recapture conversation is not only an Austin conversation. The city of Houston actually has had a running battle over recapture for the last year plus. They negotiated a deal with TEA to pay less in recapture than they were supposed to because they had said they were going to withhold everything. What the questioner is suggesting is undeniably true. Austin is sending a lot of money. The Austin you represent and that you represent is sending a lot of money back to the state. Is this a good thing or a bad thing?
It seems patently unfair that the city of Austin, Austin Independent School District is sending more money to the state of Texas than any other school district. Her comment that half of that money is going to the general fund is not accurate. Under the statute, the recapture money has to go to the foundation school program, and that's where it's going. However, she also said that we're supposed to fully fund education, and I think that gets back to the question of whether or not you believe there is enough money in the system as it is. And if you don't, then you're saying it's not fully funded.
You
But if
believe in
if you do-
recapture as a principle? The idea that the parts of the
I
state
wish
that
there
have
were
more
another
should...
way, but I don't know what it is.
So you're fine with it now in the
I mean,
absence of something else?
Look, yeah, AISD is sending $500 million to the state of Texas. Let's say all of a sudden we've done something and they don't have to send that money. Are they going to get to keep that $500 million and spend $20,000 a student in AISD while Del Valley's over here spending only $8,000 a student?
Your answer would be reduce property taxes?
They would have to reduce property taxes.
Right.
So
Right.
if you reduce the property taxes in the Austin Independent School District from $1.07 to say 65 cents, the people in Del Valley say, wait a minute, we're still at $1.07. You just gave all those other people a big old tax break. What about ours? So then you've got to lower Del Valley's. So you create another hole.
Right. Of course, one way, Representative Israel, for property taxes for schools to go down is for the state to fund public education again at the level they used to,
Yeah,
right?
step up to the plate.
Yeah.
And my response would be, again, these are big, meaty, difficult issues, and our colleagues who represent more rural parts of the state have different views, so this deserves a special session.
Do you like recapture? Do you think recapture is a good system?
No, I don't.
Well, there's an area of agreement.
I don't, but I also know that in order to get things done, I need more of my colleagues to weigh in.
Yeah.
And we're not giving this issue the attention that it deserves.
Sir. Again, there may be a switch on there, and if
Switch.
not, go ahead, use your outside voice. We can repeat. Good.
Ta.
Okay, good. Yes.
Good
Good.
morning.
Hi.
So it's very well documented and researched that poor nutrition and neurotoxins in our water significantly lead to low neurological performance and mental health issues, which could also be related to the violence we see.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering what questions are being asked in terms of the fundamental nutrition neurologically of our children in the schools, especially since they just found lead in the water in Austin. And there's also sugars and processed foods. So I'm wondering, in the question of spending resources, how much are we looking at fundamentals of nutrition?
Representative Israel.
We anguish over these small things way too much, but I agree with you. We had a bill that became a contentious issue last session, for example, that had to do with reusing school lunches that could be going towards a food bank, for example. We had a big floor fight over that. So I concur that we need to have these kind of supports for nutrition, and I would support efforts to move forward with that. What I'm not familiar with is how other schools handle this, because I know that AISD, for example, has a lot of community gardens that really are quite helpful to teach children that your tomatoes didn't come from HEB. So I support those kinds of public-private initiatives where nonprofits can weigh in and be partners with the school. But things like that I just mentioned become very, very controversial, and it kind of speaks to what we were talking about earlier.
Adam.
For my question, I just want to point out the school choice bill that Representative Workman referenced earlier was Ron Simmons's bill.
Ron Simmons, yes. Thank you.
Okay, question for both representatives. Do you believe that the city of Austin the Austin City Council acted lawfully when they refused to place the Code Next petition on the ballot?
Well, we're getting down to the weeds here. That's good. Do you believe the city of Austin acted lawfully when they refused to put Code Next on the ballot? Representative Workman.
I'm not a lawyer. I don't know the answer to that question. I'm sorry, I can't answer it.
You have a point of view about that?
They have a team of lawyers who I'm assuming said you can do this.
Okay. You gave it a good shot, though. That was good. Yeah.
Representative Workman, you made a statement that our state is to govern our cities, and that's their responsibility. So I don't understand why, and you said your constituents or who are calling you that want you to speak out on this. I am a constituent of yours. I've been to your office multiple times. I'm also a gun violence survivor. I live with a bullet in my brain, and I've reached out to your office to speak to you about common sense policies. Yet your staff has done nothing but mock me, be rude. I've asked to speak with you. I've called for private meetings. I've been refused. So I don't understand. What is your stance? You say that that 99% of law-abiding citizens should have guns, and we should have no regulations as far as safe storage or any other common sense policies. But those people they're law-abiding citizens until they do that crime, until they break that law.
Let's let the representative answer for that.
Well, first of all, I wasn't aware of your attempt to get in to see me. I have a staff member here today. If you'll get
I'm quite familiar with her. I've met with her several times.
Okay, let's let him answer. So you'll commit to having her talk to you.
We'll be glad to meet with you. What I said was that we shouldn't penalize the 99.9% of law-abiding citizens who have guns. I didn't say 99% of the people should have guns. And so I just don't think that we can penalize all of those people for the actions of a few.
So education, which you sit on the House, the Natural Resource Committee. Our children are our greatest natural resource. Education is key. So education on safe storage is a crime against law-abiding gun owners?
Now, you're getting specific about something. Education on safe storage wouldn't be a problem. I don't know why there would be any resistance to doing that. But mandating that somebody store it would be something else.
Let's go to the next side here. I appreciate your opportunity to ask a question. Thank you for a good question, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Vicki Goodwin. I really enjoy coming to your Texas Tribune events, learning about people in office and their views. I have a number of differing views from Representative Workman.
Well, let's make sure that everybody in the room knows that you are the Democratic candidate against Representative Workman. You are certainly entitled to be here, but you're not an average citizen. So let's just.
All right. Well, that was my next comment. I was going to say that because of my differing views, I am running for office, and I wanted to invite you to invite me to have a conversation with Representative Workman so that people can hear our different opinions and evaluate and go vote. So it's not really a question other than, would you invite me at some point?
We love doing events. We're always happy to have candidates on stage together. We'll certainly consider which events we're going to have for the balance of the election season, but I do appreciate the invitation to make an invitation.
Thank you.
Well, you know, Evan got a tough question.
I did, but I answered it. Did you see? I was
Take it under consideration.
I was super nice also.
Love it.
Yes.
Good afternoon. My name is Pam McDonald, and thank you both for being here. I think that's wonderful and a key to our democracy. My question is about partisan gerrymandering and nonpartisan gerrymandering. I blame both parties for this. Whichever party is in power wants to stay in power, and they gerrymander. But as technology has advanced, gerrymandering becomes more pernicious than it was. My personal belief is that gerrymandering leads to the most extreme being elected in many, many districts, and it leads to the breakdown of compromise and civility. Texas doesn't have a right for initiative and referendum. So how do you think this can be addressed?
Representative Workman, this is a really good, I'm really happy you asked this. This is a big discussion that we don't normally have out in public among non-professional political people. The reality is that all but only a handful of our elections are decided by the primary in Texas. Yeah. And that is thanks to redistricting, which means if you only have to run in your party primary, you end up playing to a much narrower slice of the electorate, and those folks end up deciding who governs the state for 2 years or for 4 years. Wouldn't it be better, since we like the free market so much in this country, hot dogs, hamburgers, Coke, Pepsi, wouldn't it be nice to have candidates of every party in every race in every district, not rig the system in advance through partisan gerrymandering on both sides, but just present people with a choice?
Well, the system we've got's been around a long time.
Yeah, Democrats were
Hundreds
in
of
an
years.
incumbency protection business before the Republicans
Yeah,
were.
so
I agree with that.
Let's
point,
be
too.
clear
Yes.
on that.
Right,
Is
yeah.
that this is not just a new deal that the Republicans
No, this
are
is
coming
how it's always been.
And,
Right.
and we're going to hear from the Supreme Court here pretty soon about whether or not partisan gerrymandering is legal. And depending on what they come down to, then we'll have to deal with that at the state level.
What is Chief Justice Workman? Now I've elevated you. Well, I mean, but I want you to be on the record about whether you think the system we have in place ultimately serves the democracy we live in well or poorly.
I think it does. I mean, look at...
Which one, well or
look at-
poorly? Well, you think it serves it well?
Yeah, I think it does. I mean, in my case, you know, Vicki Goodwin's going to run against me. We've got a district that's 53% Republican.
Right.
Easily that could be flipped. We're going to take it very seriously.
Yeah, but you know that you're the outlier.
I am not the outlier.
Oh, absolutely, you're the outlier.
Okay.
How many legislative districts, Representative Workman, do you think are not gerrymandered to the point that there is no chance in hell that a person of the opposite party will get elected?
I'm not sure.
I
But
would stipulate that
there's
maybe...
a lot of Democratic districts that are the same way.
Yeah.
Representative, do you think that our elections are competitive enough in Texas?
No, I stated that earlier.
Yeah.
And why I am sincerely upset that none of us should go without being accountable to the November electorate.
But didn't you guys do the same thing they're doing? I mean,
Yeah.
we're living at a moment when people are outraged about the thing that they were themselves doing 5 minutes ago.
Yeah.
Right? Didn't you guys do the exact same thing when you ran the state?
Yes, sir.
Look, how would you redraw
Right.
the other 5 districts in Travis County
Yeah.
that could even have a chance for a Republican?
It's absolutely complicated.
You can't do it.
This is, in fact, the questioner's point is, couldn't you throw the politics off of this and make this some kind of a technological map drawing solution? Could technology be put in place of the politics behind this? That's the questioner's point, Representative Workman. What do you think about that? Do you think it's possible?
I don't think there's any way to take the politics out of it.
You think there's any way to take the politics out of it?
I think there's a way to minimize the politics and say, here's what our technological solution scenario A, B, and C, and then work on it. But Donna Howard, more recently, is the Democrat who's been saying, let's at least take it to a nonpartisan committee to come up with the maps. And if they have technology, then let's go for it. But that bill goes nowhere. And before then, it was an item that Senator Jeff Wentworth, a Republican from Bexar County,
From San Antonio.
had, and it went nowhere. So it is an intractable thing, but what has been happening while we've each been abusing the system is that fewer and fewer people are coming out to vote, and that's a bad thing. And I think that
Do you
there's a connection.
think redistricting may have something to do with voter turnout? Representative Workman?
Do
you think that the fact that we have non-competitive elections is the precursor to having low voter turnout?
I think it probably does impact that, yes.
People think that
But I
vote
go
doesn't
back to but how would you, some of these districts, you can't draw them where they're equal.
Well, the reality is if you change the lines around one district, you change the lines around many or every, right? You're going to have to basically you have to start over. Scrape the lot and rebuild, right? Well, at least one person supports that. Okay. Sir.
First, Representative Workman, I want to thank you, ESD 14, for helping us with our sales tax issue. That's greatly appreciated and saved our neck.
You're welcome.
My question is, I believe both of you inferred, if didn't say, that to get a work visa or green card should lead to a path to citizenship.
I don't know that I heard that from either
I didn't
one,
say
actually.
that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Why? I think this is a stumbling block in our system. I hear this too often, this path to citizenship.
Yeah.
I grew up in the Bracero program, and people were documented, they came in and they worked and they went home.
Right.
I worked overseas myself, and when I went to a country, I was a guest in that country. And I think that we will never, ever resolve the problem if someone that comes to work for us has a path to citizenship.
Well, let's ask them to weigh in
I'll
on
let
that.
you
Do you think that a path to citizenship needs to be part of any immigration solution?
I disagree. I think I disagree with you. I'm not exactly sure. My mom was a part of the Bracero program. She processed folks to work in the fields at the end of World War II. She's a big fan of the Bracero program. I think that our economy is changing so much that we need workers. I think we can do a guest worker program for those who only want to be here 9 months and then go back to Guanajuato. But if that person also says, I want to demonstrate to you that I want to be a United States citizen, then they could pay a fee, show that they've learned the language, whatever other structures can be put in place so that if they want to take it to another level and say, I love this country and I want to show you that I love this country and I want to become a citizen, our economy needs them. So why would we not set up both things and say guest worker and for those of you who qualify, get in line and let's work out a system that could work for you because we need you.
We have that in place through our normal immigration
But it
program.
takes 9 years. What's the party that is in control right now is also the party that would say bureaucracy is bad. Well, then help us fix the bureaucracy and stop spending our tax dollars on a wall.
Representative Workman, quickly before we end, tell us about the question of the path to citizenship as it relates to the worker program.
Well, actually, Celia and I agree on this. I mean, if we've got a legal worker program where people can come across and they can work like the Bracero program was, and they get over here and they want to become a citizen, they can get in line and do the things that they're supposed to do. She's right. It takes too long to become a citizen. But if we could do that, it's the ones that are coming across illegally that present the problems. But a real worker program where they can come across legally and work, if they want to apply for citizenship, I think that's fine.
I like ending on agreement. Unfortunately, it's 1 o'clock. We have to stop right there. Please give Representatives Israel and Workman a big hand. Thank you to ACC. Thanks to all of you. We'll see you again. Have a good summer.